Now, before we get into Europe, I wanted to just touch base on Canada. And, I know we cover a lot of stuff and it's very difficult to hit every country. I try to make it as succinct as possible while giving a global view. So I usually overlook or don't talk about Canada as much, but I just think it's important to look at the expected Bank of Canada policy rates. And this is just, when we look at rates, when we look at things that are happening, how things are happening, what the expected policy rate is and how and where it is today. So this is where I do think we're going to continue to see, obviously, the increase in rates, the central bank pressure that we've been talking about. And these are some of those key pieces that will continue to drive higher and continue to put some of these overhangs that we've talked about into the market on the fiscal side, on the monetary side, this one being on the monetary pressure point. So now when we look at Eurozone, we want to look at CPI coming in line, not too much shift there. CPI 5%, core 2.6%, on its way higher as we've been talking about. Consumer confidence kind of right in line with expectations, was expected at -9, came in at -8.5. Now, an interesting thing when we look at PMIs, because one of the things, if you remember, we were a bit more bullish on manufacturing. We thought that there was going to be some of that catch up. We had it. The expectation was for 57.5 on the manufacturing front, came in at 59. But then as we were talking about a slowing consumer, pressure on the consumption side, services was expected at 52, came in at 51.2. So we do see that divergence still remaining, and that's going to put some of the pressure on the composite, which was expected at 52.6, came in at 52.4. So when you look at the Eurozone manufacturing PMI, supplier delivery times getting a little bit better, bouncing back a bit, but still extremes. And now, like as we've been saying, it's going to remain at extremes. It's not going to get much better, but you're going to see some benefit in terms of these shifts. And it'll ebb and flow, but you'll see some of the benefit coming back as the consumer slows a bit. Some things get a little bit better. Some of the backlog offshore starts to come onshore, and that will definitely be a big help. But we also have to look at pricing. So input prices came down a bit, as we've been saying, just as in the US. It's going to be more of a sideways move. But the output prices continue to remain elevated and, again, going sideways. And we expect these to go together and just remain elevated, putting that stickiness in inflation, that stagflation that we continue to speak about. And this is that pressure on the consumer because we haven't seen wages recover the same way in Europe as they have in the US. We have seen a lot of these pressure points, which are going to continue to be in the on that front. So then when you look at input prices, so Eurozone service PMI input prices can remain elevated, prices charged, new all-time high. And this is going to become a bigger problem because as consumers slow down their buying, how do you keep passing on prices? Like, when are prices going to come back down? And that's where we're at this friction point in Europe where, and I think this is where you're going to see kind of this, well, how slow does the consumer get? When do prices start to roll over? And this is some of that pushback that we continue to see. So then when you look at where, in Europe right now, firms, and this is, I think, important on what their expectations are as they continue to increase pricing. Firms believe they have pricing power. You look at manufacturing, about 70% say that they do. When you look at services, on the service side, about 40% say they have pricing power. The question is, do they? And we will find out. I think they have less than they assume. And it's just because the consumer in Europe is in a different state than in the US. And I think there was a bit more ability in the US to pass on some of that pricing than there is on the European front. Now, when we shift to Germany, just looking at the expectations of PPI, so as we said, what happened? I'm just laughing because the numbers are insane. So month over month, the expectation was for 0.8. It came in at 5%, and then year over year was expected at 19.3 and came in at 24.2%. To give you an idea of just how absurd pricing is on the manufacturing side, on the input cost side, and that will continue to follow through. But on PMI, as we were saying on the manufacturing front, we were expecting to be better than expected. Expectations were 57, came in at 60.5. Now, on the services front, we thought it was also going to be contractionary, and we thought it was going to be, I wouldn't say 48, but below 50. And instead, it surprised to the upside and came in at 52.2, which is a nice bright spot, and will be interesting and important to watch. But also, what caused that? And those are the pieces, and a lot of that was price on the services side, because prices went up across the board, which is a net positive when you're looking at the calculation, but as to the consumer, that's a net negative. So even though it's a good number, it's we'll have to see, is that something that's going to continue? And that pulled up the composite. Now, business climate was expected at 94.5 for IFO, came in at 95.7. Current assessment right in line at 96.1. But expectations have improved. They were expected at 93, came in at 95.2. The view is now, well, what happens if Russia, Ukraine continue the way they are? Does that damper some expectations going forward? So now when we just look at what those expectations are, manufacturing has improved as we were hoping it would and expecting. Service sector flatlining a bit, which is getting a bit better. Business expectations now back above zero. On trade, improving a bit, still an overhang as we look at Asia. And then construction, as we've been saying, has gotten a bit better, but still expectations are for some overhang. Now, just putting the PPI in perspective, going back through 2016, you can see just how big last month was and just how that accelerated year over year. And again, this is going to lead down to price increases in PMI, trying to pass through. And these are a lot of those pressure points that we've been indicating. Now, when we look at France, business confidence was expected at 109, came in at 107. Manufacturing right in line at 112. Production outlook was expected at 22, came in at 13. And you're starting to see some of this contraction in general. Now, as we were saying, PMI services was expected at 55.3, came in at 53.1. But that was expected, the services we've been talking about. But manufacturing was expected at 55.5 and 0.3 and came in at 55.5. So there's definitely some overhang in terms of where this is, how that's going to be, and what pressure that's going to push down. Because when you look at the composite, it was expected at 54.7, came in at 52.7. So services remain the overhang, as we've been saying, and that leads to, what is the consumer going to do? How much pricing power do you really have if services continue to be so weak, which is why we remain concerned about the European backdrop. Now, recent activity in series, you can continuing to come down. Expected activity in services and demand in services 1 month in advance, continuing to contract, again, indicating additional slowdowns on the PMI side on the economic front. Spain, with little surprise, PPI came in at 3.8% month over month, putting year over year at 35.9%. Again, just surging to the upside when you're looking at the pressure on the economies, the pressure on inflation on a European front, putting the Spain PPI year over year into context, going back to 2001. You see just how insane inflation is, which is why when we look at ECB, when we look at rates, when we look at what is happening in the underlying market, this is where we see those pressure points to the upside. Now, we don't talk again about the UK too much, but we also wanted to highlight just the pressure that remains there. CPI was expected at month over month was expected at 0.3, came in at 0.5. Year over year expected at 5.2, came in at 5.4. And then core was expected at 3.9%, came in at 4.2. But when you look at the pressure going forward, when you look at RPI, retail price index up to 317, RPI was expected at 0.6, came in at 1.1. RPI year over year was expected at 7.1, came in at 7.5. PPI all going back higher. It's not just, it's everywhere that's seeing it. And those are the pressures that we see, the issues that have continued to be raised on the inflation front and rate rising cycle, as we have some of this slowdown that we've highlighted and talked about on those estimates in segment 1. But now enough about Europe and beyond. We want to look at Asia and what is happening within China and some of the other ASEAN nations to learn more about trade and some of the pressure or benefits and pressures that they're facing as Omicron is really growing, is rising there versus declining in Europe and in other areas.